Cool, so I just made this, which lets you calibrate the invert Y to basically find out if the player is already got the invert Y setting on. So if I play this just to show you, this is my kind of mock-up of how a scene might look to calibrate it. So it's telling me to look up or push the right stick up or down. So if I push it up, it says it's calibrated, and it says that I'm on regular mode, but I can push the touchpad to change it at any time, and then X to continue exits. So let's just try that with invert on. Let's go to the camera, turn invert on. Then I look up by pushing the stick down. It calibrates and says I'm inverted. So the graphics and the UI and things like that are just whatever. The key is in here, this logic here. So it's actually in a different scene, in a separate element. So you can make your own complete UI and make it work however you want. So let's go and have a look at that and make our own. The actual chip will look like this. Invert Y calibrate, and yeah, all you'll have is calibrated and inverted, and that's about it, and you can do whatever you like with it. Okay, so we'll start off with a microchip, and we're going to use a controller sensor. So if I just put a marker there, this is roughly where that controller sensor is. Okay, and then we go into view mode, and we are looking at that cube, and we can look up and down, and it's as if it's a puppet. So if you try and look up too much, then it starts going into the ground, so it becomes closer to the puppet, and then it goes out as you pull away, and it kind of circles round and orbits this one point, and that's the feature we're going to use. So then if we put it onto inverted mode and play it, we're still around that point, but then when I push up, the camera moves up and looks down on the cube, which is the inverted way of going about things. So we don't need that cube, we just need this object here, this gadget here. So that's because this is possessable. So we need to leave it possessable, and we'll just make it auto-possess with force possession. Now we need to know if we're pushing the stick up or down. And then we're going to compare that to where the camera ends up. Because if we use this to get the camera details, if we go to the outputs, it now has camera transform. So while this controller sensor is possessed, we can get the camera transform. So we're going to get a splitter, and then we'll use that camera output. Now this camera output is a scene transform type of fat wire, which means it has lots of values going out of it that represent a position and an orientation and a scale. And we want the position, but then the position has an A, B or C, and this maps to X, Y and Z. So we want the Y position, because we want to know if the Y position is going up or down based on when the player pushes up or down on the right stick. So if I go into here, if I push up, the camera's moving down, so we're getting a lower number, and then when I push down, the camera's moving up, so I'm getting a high number. And if you had inverted setting on, it would go around the other way. So that's step one sorted. But now we need the right stick. If we're pushing the right stick at the time, that this becomes a positive or negative number. So I'll just show you what we get out of the right stick, and we'll just use right stick local because we don't really care about the way the camera is focusing relative to the way we're pushing the stick. So use the right stick local, and we'll just display that value as well. Use the Y value, and I'll move that up. So the one at the top is the right stick, and the one at the bottom is the camera. So while I'm pushing up on the right stick, nothing's happening with the camera now, because the possessed camera sensor, it knows that you're using the right stick for something, so then it stops it messing with the camera, so that you can easily just turn that off basically. So instead of using the same one, we'll use another controller sensor, and this time in remote controllable, which means it just sends the values and stuff from your controller, and it doesn't really care about anything else. So let's do the same thing. So now when I have a negative number on the Y, then the camera's going lower. And then when you push down, the right stick value is becoming higher. The camera value is going up as well because the camera's moving up. So we can use that to say if the camera moves below a certain threshold and we're pushing down on the stick, then that means it's regular or it means it's inverted or whatever. One last thing though, if we actually add that cube again, so we know what we're looking at, and then we go into view mode, then we're actually looking down on the cube a bit, but we want to look straight ahead really. So what we're going to do is change the controller sensor's camera settings. You can change these to whatever you want really. Apart from the tilt, you really want it to be 0, so that when you start, you just head on to the actual controller sensor itself. Another thing you need to do is go into the camera settings and set camera height to 50%, because this it bases it on the possessed object, which is currently like it doesn't really exist, but it goes higher or lower based on this camera height. And to make sure that we get proper values, and it also helps with the calculations, we're going to add a tag. Now a tag has a position in the world. It also has like a scale and rotation and things, just like the camera transform. We'll leave it where it is, so that this position and that position are the same. So now you're orbiting around that position as well, but you have like the initial up and down position of that tag, which you can compare to how the camera reacts to the player moving around. So if we copy those and wire that scene space transform in there, then we can get that Y value from there as well. So this will be the bottom one. We have exactly the same number as the camera's Y position and the tag Y position. So we can now use that to get the difference. So instead of having, we could like subtract that from that and so on, but I'm just going to delete those, and I'm going to use a calculator to just subtract the whole thing, which is probably less efficient, but it lets me kind of show off how to do this. Right, so it's got this fat wire and it's subtracting this other fat wire, and it's subtracting each individual value, like it has all these different values inside here. It's subtracting like the position X from the position X of this tag, and the position Y from position Y, and so on. So it does it for all of the things, and then we can just split it after that, because it spits out the same type of fat wire as it was receiving, but with those changes. So now we can see what we actually end up with. So it starts at 0. If I start pushing up, then we're getting a negative number, and if I start pushing down, it goes higher into a positive number. So then we can use that to trigger checking what the difference in Y with the camera, if it's moved down, and then check if the player is currently holding the right stick down. And if they are, then we can make some deductions about things. So I'm going to use this special technique where you can plug right into a timeline to kind of have different things happen for different ranges of values. So if I get a value slide over here that just sends a value that's on this slider, and if I plug that into the playhead, I can control where the playhead is with a percentage. So if I go 100%, it's 100% along, and 50% is in the middle, and 0 is on the left. So we can do that with this Y value as well. If I just plug it in there, actually, I can show you what that gives us. So now I can go into test mode, which means I can see all the windows and gadgets and stuff while I'm playing. So the camera, as the camera moves up, it goes along the timeline more until it gets to 1, which is 100%. And then as the camera goes down again, it goes down back to the start. But we want to kind of have this end be when it's in negative numbers and this end be when it's in positive numbers. So for that, we'll use a signal manipulator to kind of map the values we're actually getting to a different range of values. So let's go here and plug that in, signal manipulator. Use a custom remapper. So coming in is positive and negative values like that, and then going out is a percentage value like that. So now, if I plug that in there, or if I show you what's going on here first, if I just scale this up using up and down while holding the window, then I can go into test mode, and you can see what values it's giving us. When it's going down on the left, it's clearly going down, and then on the right, it's being mapped to, instead of a negative number, it's a small positive number. And when it's about even, then it's sending out about 50% and then going up. So it just kind of shrinks these down into that range of numbers instead. And let's see what that does. So it starts off at 50%, which is good. When we get to here, it's at the top of the thing, which is fine. It only gets to that point though, so we'll need to be careful of that. So let's just range. So while this is open and time is playing, it shows that graph. And then if you click Learn Input Range, then it snaps to the minimum values that it's received in this period of time and the maximum values. So if we look up and down, we can then pause it over here and go out of test mode and learn input range. But really we want to just narrow it down. So this is 0.47, and if we scale this up we can see better. We want to know if we just get to like here maybe, and so we'll put this to around the same area, and that will map to the percentage instead. So now let's look at the timeline while we test that. So looking up and down, so that now it's very easy to see at what point we should start like checking stuff. So maybe we'll just do it a quarter of the way through, and then 3/4 of the way through, something like that. So now we can actually put gadgets on here that do things, not just music and not just keyframes, but any gadget we want. So I'm going to put a microchip, plug in the right stick value of up and down to a calculator. So we'll put a calculator in, and then we'll plug that up and down of the right stick into there, and say if it's above 0, then that means we're pushing the right stick down, is it? Yeah, we're pushing the right stick down. So yeah, we'll just set this up, and we may have to move this to the other end, but that's not too difficult. We'll just show something if we think we're inverted. So we'll just do that and plug that in there. So if we pin that to the screen and go into test mode, then we can see as the playhead goes over that part of the timeline, then those gadgets become powered on, and then when it's out of there, then they become powered off, which is exactly what you want. So this is going to be the inverted, if we're greater than 0, pushing down on the stick, and the camera's gone down, that means the inverted setting is active. And then we want to do the same at the other end. Now to get this to kind of snap nicely to the areas, we'll click on this with X to turn it onto beats mode. And now if I get closer, you can see it has the beats and the bars, and you can easily snap to these things. So I'll just make that like that, and then make that from 3/4 mark. And now I'll push this off the end so that when the playhead is all the way at the end, it's still powered. Because if it just stopped at the end like that, then it will stop powering it when it's right at the end. So we'll just have it overhanging like that. Now this one, we'll check if the stick was being pushed up. So that's less than 0. So now let's try that. Right, so the first one is being activated. And I had a negative number. So if it's a positive number, then it's inverted. So we'll plug that in as well. We'll put it onto inverted mode. So that's working. And then when we go into non-inverted mode, then and we rewind, then it won't give us that warning. So, but you may notice there that when we continue on and then we go down again, it starts thinking we're inverted, because now we're already below that plane, but we're now holding down on the right stick. So as soon as this is checked, we want to just stop checking entirely and just assume that we've already figured it out. To actually store if it's inverted or not, I'm going to add a selector. And the selector has multiple channels, and it will send a signal from one of the channels only forever. So if you tell it to be on channel B, it will send a signal from channel B forever from then on until you tell it to be a different channel. So all I need to do is use a switch and plug that into B. So it starts off at A all the time. Every selector does that. But then when I turn on the switch to send a signal into B, then B becomes the active channel and it sends a signal. So we'll keep that switch, and we'll just add a keyframe to turn the switch on. And now while this keyframe is powered, the switch is on. So you put that in there, make sure it's powered, so that when the microchip becomes powered, the keyframe turns on and then turns on the switch. And copy that into there, and they'll both affect that switch. So we actually want to just power that if we're inverted like that. So we'll do that, and do it for the other one. And instead of having this display up here, we'll put it down there. And while we think that we're inverted, then we'll power that text at the top. So we'll delete that, and now if I try that again, yeah, so now forevermore it thinks we're inverted. Cool, but the problem was that once we find that out, we actually want us to turn off this timeline and things. So easy way of doing that is to use a keyframe and turn off the power, and then we'll make that keyframe keep changes. So when that power's on, it will turn off the timeline, and even after it's been turned off, the timeline will stay off. And we'll just make sure that's powered again. Copy that into there. So now when we go into here, it'll immediately turn off the timeline, and it will check that at the same time, and then not check it again. Now when you're working with timelines and you want something to happen on the first end, if you're controlling the playhead, it actually takes a frame for the timeline to catch up. In the meantime, so if I just play, it kind of flashes like that. And even if that wasn't there, it starts off as being powered. So we need to delay this stuff from working just a little tiny time. So for that I use a timeline, and if I make the timeline, if I zoom in using L1 and right on the D-pad, it kind of scales it just horizontally, and now I can see individual frames here. So I can use a keyframe to turn off the thing I don't want to work, which is that and that. So for one frame, these things don't check anything, and then it will continue to check stuff as normal right at the start, because that will just play at the start. Let's turn on invert and rewind. Right, so that works. And if we are not inverted and rewind, then it doesn't find that we're inverted. But now if we go into edit mode again and it's paused, this timeline is now off. It's not doing anything. We know that this will never change because we're not sending a signal into A, so we know that we're not inverted. So we can actually add another thing here. So if I rewind it, it's assuming I'm regular until I actually change, and then it knows for sure and locks that in. But if I go and change that setting, then it assumes I'm regular until I move a little bit, and then it knows I'm using the inverted thing, which is displayed at the top. Now, for the chip that you'll see when you import this logic, there's actually another little another little output, which just tells you if it's already calibrated it or not. So all that does is use this and another switch. So I'll use a switch. So when the scene starts, then it's always on A, so it's not sending a signal out of here. And then when we've calibrated, that'll turn on and change that to B, and then it will send a signal. So if you're using this stuff in your scene, you can know that it's actually calibrated it or not. So then we just have a keyframe that turns that on when we've done the actual check. Oh, well, we need to make sure that's turned on and put that in the other one as well. And I'll just and power that just to demonstrate that it's working. So now it's calibrated. And if we change that to there and then rewind, now it's calibrated. So then you can have a scene with this kind of logic in it, and then use that to set a variable or something so that the player doesn't have to recalibrate every time they start a scene. But also it's advisable to let them toggle it inverted to regular or vice versa manually, in case for some reason this doesn't work or they pass the controller to someone else or whatever. I'd like to thank Xcantaloupe, CodeBeones, Mobius DT and all of my other supporters for making this tutorial possible. Check out TAPgiles.com to find out how you can support me in helping Dreams creators. Thanks for your consideration, and I'll see you in the next one.